Adrian Vale's name glowed beneath mine as I lifted the microphone and prepared to destroy him. The Helix auditorium gleamed with white marble and brushed steel, every cold surface reflecting 300 investors, executives, and reporters. Camera shutters clicked like insects beneath the hum of recessed lights. I stood at the center of the stage in a charcoal suit tailored to sharpen every line of my body, the Ashford silver pin cool against my lapel. At 29, I was the Omega heir to Ashford Dynamics, and I had never entered a room expecting anything less than victory. Adrian watched from the opposite presentation table. 32, pale-skinned, dark-haired, and infuriatingly composed, the Alpha CEO of Vale Industries rested one hand beside his sealed proposal. His cedar scent barely reached me through the auditorium's neutralizing system, yet I recognized it immediately. Vale Industries has offered an ambitious model, I told the committee, letting the word ambitious land like an accusation. Unfortunately, Helix requires more than elegant projections and an alpha accustomed to having silence mistaken for authority. A few investors laughed. Adrian did not. He adjusted one silver cuff link, his gaze fixed on me with the patience of a man watching someone step onto thin ice. I tapped the screen behind me. Ashford's figures filled 40 feet of glass, projected revenue, infrastructure costs, and a completion timeline 6 months shorter than Vale's. Helix will determine who controls secure medical data across the country, I continued. It should be led by a company with proven scale, not by one whose CEO confuses restraint with substance. The laughter came louder this time. My father's empty board seat was visible in the front row, but the Ashford directors surrounding it nodded in approval. Reputation was currency in our world, and I had just spent Adrian's for applause. He rose when the committee chair called his name. No anger tightened his mouth. No alpha command entered his voice. That restraint irritated me more than any threat could have. Julian is correct about one thing, Adrian said. His low voice carried cleanly through the speakers. Helix requires proven numbers. He touched his tablet, and the display changed. A federal compliance score appeared beside both bids. Ashford, 81. Vale, 96. The room went silent except for the faint ventilation hiss overhead. Ashford's timeline excludes mandatory Omega data safeguards scheduled to take effect next quarter, Adrian continued. Adding them raises its cost by 18% and delays delivery by 11 months. Heat gathered under my collar. I turned toward my legal team. No one met my eyes. Adrian could have looked triumphant. Instead, he looked directly at me, as if the crowded auditorium had narrowed to the 12 feet between us. Vale's proposal includes those protections, he said. And unlike Mr. Ashford, I won't confuse confidence with readiness. The committee withdrew for 17 minutes. I counted every second through the bitter coffee cooling untouched beside my hand. When they returned, the chair placed a cream folder on the podium. The Helix contract is awarded to Vale Industries. Applause struck the marble walls. My fingers tightened around the table's edge until the brushed metal bid into my palm. Then the chair raised her hand. Because Ashford controls infrastructure essential to deployment, the federal consortium has attached a condition. Mr. Vale and Mr. Ashford will serve as joint executive directors for a 90-day integration period. Either man may reject the arrangement, but his company will forfeit all participation in Helix. Adrian had won, yet he could not proceed without me. I had lost, yet walking away would cost Ashford the largest contract in its history and my place as heir apparent. He crossed the stage as reporters surged toward us, their voices overlapping beneath bursts of white light. His offered hand was warm, steady, and impossible to ignore. 90 days, he said. I took it before the cameras could capture hesitation. Try to keep up. His thumb pressed once against my knuckles before he released me. That, Adrian murmured, is exactly what I'm worried you won't do. By sunset, the rival I had humiliated would have an office behind mine, authority equal to mine, and access to every Helix decision I made. The contract in my hand smelled of fresh ink, and beside our two signatures waited a blank line labeled, Joint Failure Provision. If either of us fell, both companies would pay the price. Red numbers crawled across the conference room display while the ventilation system whispered above us. For days into our joint command of Helix, an unexplained $8.4 million transfer had appeared under my authorization code, routed from Ashford's infrastructure budget to a shell vendor I had never approved. The glass walls were already darkened for privacy, trapping the smell of burned coffee and warm circuitry inside. I stood at the head of the steel table as 3 Ashford directors demanded my access be suspended before the federal auditors arrived at 9. "That signature is mine," I said, enlarging the authorization record. "The transfer isn't." My finance chief slid a tablet toward me. Its black edge scraped against the metal. "Only your credentials could release that amount, Julian." Beyond the glass, Adrian waited in his new office, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his dark head bent over a file. He had not asked to join us. That should have reassured me. Instead, every time the red total pulsed, I found myself looking toward him. The directors gave me until midnight to identify the breach. Failure meant surrendering Ashford's financial authority over Helix, not to the board, but to Adrian. By 11, cold coffee coated my tongue, and the numbers still formed a perfect accusation. My security team found no external intrusion. Finance found no duplicate payment order. Someone had used my biometric confirmation from inside Ashford Tower. The directors left one by one, their shoes clicking across the polished floor, carrying their doubts with them. Adrian entered only after the last elevator chimed. Cedar cut through the stale air. "If you came to measure the curtains," I said, "wait until morning." He locked the glass door, crossed to the display, and placed a cream folder beneath my hand. "Your authorization wasn't stolen." How comforting. It was replayed. He opened the folder to 3 printouts marked with times, terminal numbers, and approval chains. The same 7-second biometric packet had appeared months earlier on harmless equipment purchases, always processed by my deputy finance director, Marcus Dean. I stared at the repeated timestamps. Marcus had worked beside me for 6 years. He knew which fountain pen I used at board meetings and how much bergamot I tolerated in my tea. "You accessed Ashford records without permission." I compared the Helix ledger with public vendor filings. Adrian tapped one corporate address. "The shell vendor's registered agent is Marcus's brother-in-law." "Why bring this to me privately?" "Because an accusation from Vale would look like a takeover." His gaze held mine in the blue light. "And because you'd attack me before checking whether I was right." The answer landed with humiliating precision. I called Marcus and ordered him upstairs. Adrian moved toward the door. "Stay," I said. The word came out sharper than intended. 20 minutes later, Marcus entered smelling of winter air and expensive cologne. He denied everything until I placed the matching biometric packets before him. Then his hand flattened over the folder, wrinkling the paper. He admitted diverting the money to trigger my removal and promised the transfer could be reversed before the audit. I revoked his credentials, froze the vendor account, and sent the evidence to federal compliance myself. The confirmation tone sounded at 11:47 p.m. By midnight, every dollar was back. My authority remained mine, but 6 years of trust left the building under security escort. When the elevator doors closed around Marcus, I returned to find Adrian erasing his research from the shared display. "You knew I'd refuse help if you offered it," I said. "Yes." "You knew I'd believe my own people before you." "Yes." His reflection watched me in the black glass, still and unreadable. I picked up the cream folder and felt the impression of his handwriting pressed into its rough paper. "You understand exactly how I'll fail." Adrian faced me then, close enough that the cedar in his scent displaced the bitter coffee. "No, Julian. I understand how hard you'll fight not to." For once, I had no weaponized answer. I had spent years treating Adrian as the obstacle between me and victory. Now he was the only man who had seen the trap, understood my pride, and protected me without demanding the credit. At 12:03 a.m., I opened our shared calendar and accepted the 3-day Helix strategy retreat I had rejected twice. The mountain resort was 6 hours away, and attendance required both executive directors. "Don't mistake this for trust," I told him. Adrian's mouth shifted at one corner as my acceptance appeared on his phone. "I wouldn't insult you by calling it that." The elevator opened behind us with a soft bell. This time, when he stepped inside, I followed. Snow struck the resort windows like handfuls of salt, whitening the glass until the mountains disappeared. By 9 that night, the highway had closed. The power had dropped to emergency mode, and amber lamps cast trembling shadows over the cedar-paneled suite assigned to Helix's joint directors. I stood beside the cold fireplace with an empty suppressant case cutting into my palm. The final capsule should have lasted until morning. Instead, heat moved beneath my skin in sharp waves, and Adrian's cedar scent seemed to fill every breath. "Take the bedroom," he said from across the room. Wind groaned through the rafters. He had already put 10 feet between us, his coat buttoned to his throat as if fabric could restrain instinct. "I'll wait in the lobby." "The lobby is closed." Then the hallway. Ice rattled against the balcony doors. I crossed to the suite phone, but the receiver gave only a dead hum. My cell showed no service, and the resort clinic had lost access to its refrigerated medication cabinet when the backup generator failed. No road crew would reach us before dawn. Adrian opened the door. Freezing air swept inside, carrying pine and snow. "Lock it behind me. Stop deciding for me." My voice came out rougher than intended. Adrian's hand remained on the brass handle, but he did not turn around. "I'm giving you space. You're retreating because you assume I can't distinguish biology from choice." That made him face me. Firelight from the emergency lamp edged his dark hair and copper. "Can you?" I set the empty case on the table. The plastic clicked against polished oak. Then I removed my executive pin, placed it beside the case, and crossed the distance between us. Every step burned through another excuse. The storm, the medication, the years of competition. I stopped within reach without touching him. "Ask me tomorrow," I said. "If my answer changes, you leave and never use tonight against me." His jaw tightened. "And if it doesn't? Then you accept that this is my decision." Adrian searched my face while the wind battered the building. "Say what you want, Julian." No boardroom had ever demanded more of me than those 5 words. I took his wrist and pressed his open hand against my racing pulse. His fingers stayed motionless, warm against my skin, waiting. "You," I said. "Not because we're trapped. Not because you're an alpha. Because you are the only man who has ever stood close enough to defeat me and refused to make me smaller." The room seemed to narrow around his breath. "Once I cross this line," he said, "I won't pretend it meant nothing. Neither will I." I closed the door myself and turned the lock. What followed belonged to no contest we had fought before. There were no witnesses, no leverage, and no victory to display. Only the low roar of the storm, the cedar warmth of his arms, and the deliberate consent we asked for at every step. Years of sharpened remarks gave way to quiet truths in the darkness. When dawn finally silvered the snowbanks outside, I woke beneath a wool blanket with Adrian sitting at the edge of the bed, giving me distance even then. My executive pin rested on the nightstand beside a glass of water. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I picked up the pin, but instead of fastening it to my shirt, I closed my fingers around it. No. The answer changed the air between us more completely than the storm had changed the mountain. Adrian looked toward the blocked highway. "Then tell me what happens when we go back." I held his gaze across the pale morning light. "We finish Helix." My fingers tightened around the cold metal. "And we never call last night a mistake." The ultrasound monitor flickered blue against the darkened exam room, its soft electrical hum threading through the steady hiss of the air vent. Cold gel tightened the skin below my ribs as Dr. Mercer guided the probe across my abdomen, then stopped. 5 weeks had passed since the storm. 5 weeks of bitter coffee, sleepless dawns, and Adrian watching me across the Helix conference table as if the space between us contained unfinished words. "There," the doctor said. A rapid pulse filled the room, delicate but unmistakable. I fixed my eyes on the acoustic ceiling tiles. "Confirm the pregnancy and give me the projected due date." Her hand shifted. A second rhythm joined the first, slightly offset, turning the clinical room into an impossible duet. My fingers closed around the paper sheet beneath me until it crackled. Dr. Mercer angled the screen toward me. 2 small shapes rested inside separate sacks. "Twins, Mr. Ashford." The image looked like spilled silver in the monitor's glow. "Both appear healthy." I sat up too quickly, and the room tilted beneath the sharp smell of antiseptic. "Who has access to this record?" "Only authorized clinical staff unless you release it. Seal it under executive privacy protocol." She hesitated, then passed me the tablet. I signed with a fingertip that left a damp print on the glass. Outside, noon traffic rolled through rain-dark streets, tires whispering over wet pavement. Adrian had called twice during the appointment. His third call lit my phone while I stood beneath the clinic awning with the ultrasound print sealed inside my leather portfolio. I rejected it, then opened the Helix governance charter. If I told him, the choice would no longer belong only to me. Adrian would look at me with that infuriating steadiness and offer patience instead of demands. The possibility was worse than a fight. By 3, I had summoned Helix's legal team to Ashford Tower. White daylight glared across the 42nd floor boardroom, and the air smelled of toner and burnt espresso. I placed a revised leadership resolution on the black glass table. Effective Monday, Vale Industries becomes a silent technical partner. All executive authority transfers to Ashford Dynamics. Counsel Reynolds adjusted his glasses. The charter requires cause to remove a joint director. Then use the missed integration deadline. Your division missed it too. I slid a second folder toward him. Inside lay my personal voting proxies, collateral assignments, and a guarantee backed by my Ashford Trust. I'll absorb every penalty and refinance Helix myself. The attorney's face tightened. If the board rejected my terms, I could lose my trust distributions, my seat, and the financial independence that had defined every decision of my adult life. File it, I said. At 6:12, Adrian entered without knocking. Rain jeweled the shoulders of his charcoal coat, and cedar followed him into the chilled room. His gaze moved from the attorneys to the resolution beneath my hand. He did not raise his voice. You're removing me. I'm consolidating command. 5 weeks ago, you said we would finish Helix. The ultrasound print pressed against the inside of my portfolio, close enough to touch. 2 hidden heartbeats seemed louder than the rain tapping the windows. Circumstances changed. Adrian placed his phone on the table. The Helix board seal glowed on its screen beside a newly scheduled emergency vote. Then say what changed. I fastened my executive pin to my lapel, covering the unsteady rise of my chest with cold metal and practiced precision. Nothing you have a right to know. His eyes held mine for one long second before he gathered the resolution. You gave the board 48 hours to choose between us. They'll choose me. Adrian moved to the door, then paused beneath the hard white light. Perhaps. But when they ask why you risked your inheritance to make me disappear, what will you tell them? The latch clicked behind him. I drew out the ultrasound image at last. 2 pale forms floated beneath my name while the emergency vote counted down on the wall display. 47 hours, 59 minutes. Before either heartbeat could become Adrian's choice, I would force him out of Helix and accept whatever crown I had to burn to do it. Rainwater crawled down the boardroom windows as the emergency vote reached its final minute, turning Manhattan's lights into streaks of white and amber. The ventilation system breathed cold air across the polished table, carrying the bitter smell of untouched coffee. I entered with Counsel Reynolds at my shoulder and found Adrian standing alone beside my chair. The sealed ultrasound print lay between his fingers. Your portfolio opened when security scanned it, he said. Reynolds saw the medical seal and gave it directly to me. My nails pressed crescents into my palm. Give it back. Adrian crossed the room, but instead of touching me, he placed the image face down beneath my hand. His voice dropped below the rain striking the glass. Twins, they are not leverage in your fight for Helix. Neither are you. He took one measured step back. I won't petition for parental authority. I won't contact Dr. Mercer, and I won't disclose this without your consent. The boardroom doors opened before I could answer. 11 directors filed in beneath strips of hard white light, their shoes clicking against stone. Chairman Whitmore activated the central screen, and my leadership resolution appeared beside a second document I had never seen. Temporary incapacity review. The room's temperature seemed to fall another 10 degrees. We received notice of a material medical condition, Whitmore said. Given Project Helix's exposure, the board must determine whether you remain capable of serving as joint executive director. Adrian's chair scraped backward. Medical status is not evidence of incapacity. This is Ashford governance, Whitmore replied. You have no standing in the succession matter. Adrian looked at me, not at them. Tell me what you want me to do. Every other person in the room had already decided what my body meant. Weakness, liability, an opening at the top. Adrian alone waited for an answer. Nothing, I said. This decision is mine. Then I moved. I crossed to the central console, pressed my executive pin against the biometric reader, and canceled my own resolution to remove him from Helix. A warning flashed red across the screen. Action irreversible during active board session. I confirmed it. The resolution vanished. Murmurs moved around the table like dry paper. Whitmore struck his palm against the glass. Mr. Ashford, this review concerns your judgment as much as your health. Then record my judgment accurately. I removed the ultrasound image from beneath my hand and set it beside the board seal. Two pale shapes shone under the ceiling lights. I am 12 weeks pregnant. The pregnancy is stable. There are 2 children, and Adrian Vale is their father. Silence swallowed the room until even the rain seemed distant. Adrian's controlled expression broke for one breath. His hand tightened on the back of the chair, but he did not claim the image or reach for me. Whitmore recovered first. This admission confirms an undisclosed conflict between Helix's joint directors. No, I said. It confirms that I concealed a personal fact while fulfilling every contractual duty. If you intend to remove me, vote on my performance in public session. Put your names beside the claim that an Omega becomes incompetent the moment he carries children. One director lowered her eyes. Another closed the incapacity file. Reynolds cleared his throat. Under the charter, that standard would expose Ashford Dynamics to immediate discrimination action. The motion failed, 7 votes to 4. My seat remained mine, but the result burned across every terminal in the room, carrying my secret into the corporate record. Adrian waited until the directors had gone. Warm light from the hallway cut across his dark suit, while the boardroom behind me remained blue and cold. You could have let them remove me, I said, and kept the truth. I told you. I won't turn fatherhood into a weapon. His gaze dropped briefly to the ultrasound, then returned to mine. But someone supplied your sealed medical status to this board. The elevator chimed beyond the open doors. Before either of us could move, Reynolds hurried back, his face drained beneath the fluorescent light, and placed a takeover notice on the table. Vale Industries had received an offer designed to force Adrian out unless he surrendered control by noon tomorrow. The brass hands of the conference room clock swept toward noon, each click sharp against the low hum of Vale Industries servers. Winter sunlight cut through the glass walls and colorless bands, and the air smelled of hot circuitry and Adrian's coffee gone cold. On the central screen, the hostile offer glowed above a countdown. 11 minutes, 42 seconds. I stood beside Counsel Reynolds while Adrian read the final page without touching the chair reserved for him. The choice was brutally simple. If Vale's board accepted the offer, the buyers would gain enough voting power to seize Adrian's company and use its Helix obligations to trigger Ashford's debt covenants. If Adrian transferred his controlling shares into an independent trust first, the takeover mechanism would collapse, but he would lose command of the empire he had built. There's another option, I said. Ashford can acquire a blocking position. With what? Adrian asked quietly. Your emergency reserves are frozen after the missing $8.4 million. The digital clock clicked again. 10 minutes. I slid my voting key across the steel table. Then take my Helix authority. Use it as collateral. Adrian looked at the key, then pushed it back with one finger. The metal whispered over the polished surface. No, this is not charity. It would bind your company, your medical decisions, and our children's future to my debt. His voice stayed level, but a pulse beat hard beneath his jaw. You told that board the truth, so no one could control you through this pregnancy. I will not become the next man who tries. The words left no room for my usual weapons. No counteroffer. No humiliation sharp enough to restore the distance between us. Adrian turned to Reynolds. Open the irrevocable trust instrument. Reynolds hesitated. Once you authenticate it, the Vale board appoints an interim CEO. Your supermajority rights disappear immediately. Open it. Blue light washed over Adrian's face as the document appeared. 43% of Vale Industries. Voting control. Appointment authority. The office carrying his family's name. Each asset was listed in clean black type, stripped of every sacrifice required to build it. Adrian removed his signet ring and set it beside the biometric pad. The gold struck glass with a small, final sound. Beneficiary? Reynolds asked. No private beneficiary. Independent stewardship for 10 years. Restrict the trust from acquiring Ashford equity or asserting any parental claim on my behalf. I stepped closer. Heat from the floor vent brushed my ankles. while the glass beneath my palm remained cold. You don't have to prove anything to me. Adrian finally met my eyes. I'm not proving it. I'm choosing what I can live without. The countdown reached 6 minutes. He pressed his thumb to the reader. A soft tone sounded, almost gentle. Then the screen changed. Transfer executed. Control rights terminated. Adrian's access badge flashed red on the table. Somewhere beyond the glass, elevator doors opened, and footsteps crossed the marble lobby. His executive assistant stopped outside, removed Adrian's nameplate from the reception desk, and carried it away without looking inside. The hostile offer expired seconds later. Ashford's debt warning vanished from Reynolds's tablet. My company was safe. Adrian's was no longer his. I waited for conditions, for custody papers, a public partnership, my Helix vote, anything that would turn his loss into a transaction. Adrian picked up the ultrasound image instead, studied the two pale shapes beneath the overhead light, then returned it to me without letting his fingers brush mine. They owe me nothing, he said. Neither do you. The twins shifted low beneath my ribs, a brief flutter against the tailored fabric of my shirt. I covered the place with my hand. Across from me, Adrian lifted his coat from the chair, now a visitor inside the building he had ruled an hour earlier. Before he reached the door, every screen in the conference room went black. A single internal notice replaced the takeover files. Adrian Vale removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. He read it once, shoulders still square, and walked into the cold white corridor. For the first time in my life, victory tasted like metal. I took my voting key from the table and followed him. Adrian. He stopped but did not turn. I closed my fingers around the ultrasound image, crushing its edge. You chose to stand beside me when it cost you everything. My shoes struck the marble as I crossed the distance between us. Now I'm choosing where I stand. Cold air rushed through the revolving doors as snow swept across the Vale Plaza, whitening the black stone beneath Adrian's shoes. Behind us, security gates clicked into lockdown, and the scent of wet wool mixed with the metallic heat rising from the lobby vents. My phone vibrated against the ultrasound image in my hand. A priority notice from Dr. Mercer filled the screen. Sealed prescription audit completed. Patient authorization required. I stopped beneath the awning. Adrian turned at the scrape of my heel, but I was already pressing my thumb to the consent field. Julian, you don't have to open that here. I'm done letting other people decide what I'm allowed to know. The audit unfolded across the glass. My suppressant prescription had been altered 18 hours before the Helix retreat. The dosage reduction carried my biometric authorization, but the security image attached to it showed my uncle entering Ashford's private medical office with an executive override card. A second file connected that card to the Helix voting proxy used during the takeover. One signature. One man. The snow hissed against the awning while traffic growled 4 stories below. I enlarged the records until the timestamps aligned. My uncle sabotaged the medication, then used the consequences to question my capacity and seize Helix. Adrian's mouth tightened. He said nothing. That silence made me look at him. You knew? I suspected. How long? Adrian reached inside his coat and removed a slim, encrypted drive. Its casing was scratched, the metal warm from his body. Since the resort pharmacy reported an inventory discrepancy, I stared at the drive rather than take it. You investigated my medical records? No. His answer cut cleanly through the wind. Dr. Mercer offered access after the board filed its incapacity review. I refused. Those records belong to you. He set the drive on the stone ledge between us. I collected corporate evidence instead, override logs, proxy transfers, payments routed through Marcus Dean, and messages showing your uncle ordered the $8.4 million diversion. Nothing from your sealed chart. Nothing obtained without your consent. My fingers closed around the drive. The ridged casing pressed into my palm. You could have used this to destroy Ashford before surrendering Vale, and publicly expose that your suppressant failed before you chose to disclose the pregnancy? Adrian shook his head once. That would have made your body my defense strategy. A horn blared in the street. I flinched, and the twins shifted beneath my ribs. Adrian's hand lifted, then stopped several inches from me. He waited. I took that unfinished gesture and placed his palm against my coat. For one breath, neither of us moved. Then one of the babies kicked beneath his hand. Adrian's fingers trembled against the wool. You protected my choice, I said, even when it made you look guilty. Your uncle needed you to believe I engineered the retreat. Rivalry made me the easiest answer, and arrogance made me accept it. I turned toward the lobby. Adrian caught my wrist, not hard, only enough to stop the encrypted drive from disappearing into my pocket. If you release those files, the payments lead through the Ashford family trust. Your uncle won't fall alone. I know. Your inheritance could be frozen. I know. Then choose after you've seen everything. I pulled free, crossed to the public security terminal, and inserted the drive. Blue light spilled over the marble as hundreds of authenticated files populated the screen. At the bottom waited one recording, my uncle instructing Marcus to reduce my dosage, manufacture the financial breach, and blame Adrian when my judgment came under review. I copied the archive into my personal legal vault and revoked every executive credential bearing my uncle's authorization. Across Ashford Dynamics, his access died in real time. Office doors, accounts, Helix systems, all turning red. My phone rang before the final lock completed. My uncle's name burned across the screen. I answered and switched to speaker. "Restore my access," he said, his voice smooth beneath the static. "By midnight, or the trustees will remove you from the Ashford succession permanently." Adrian stood beside me without reaching for the phone. I looked through the glass at our reflections, two rivals stripped of their empires, his hand still curved from feeling our child move. "Come to the Helix boardroom," I told my uncle. "Bring the trustees. At midnight, one of us loses the Ashford name." The boardroom clock struck midnight with a muted brass chime, and the privacy glass turned opaque around us. White ceiling panels cast a sterile glare across the black walnut table. Beneath the steady hum of the vents, sleep ticked against the windows 40 floors above Manhattan. Julian's uncle sat between the trustees with one hand resting on a sealed succession decree. Chairman Whitmore faced the wall display, while Counsel Reynolds arranged two documents beside a cold silver carafe. Adrian took the chair at Julian's right, not the head of the table. No lawyers surrounded him. No veil security waited outside. When Julian placed the encrypted drive before Chairman Whitmore, his uncle slid the decree forward. "Withdraw your accusations, restore my credentials, and your inheritance remains intact." Julian opened his personal legal vault instead. The blue display illuminated his face, catching the sharp line of his cheek and the faint tremor in his fingers. Beneath the table, one of the twins pressed hard against his ribs. He steadied himself against the walnut edge, then authorized simultaneous release to federal regulators, Ashford shareholders, and every member of the Helix Oversight Committee. His uncle rose so quickly that the leather chair struck the wall. "Once you send that, the trust cannot be restored." Adrian started to stand. Julian touched two fingers to his sleeve, and Adrian stopped. "No rescue. No command. Only presence. I spent 29 years believing that name made me untouchable," Julian said. "You counted on me protecting the throne even after I learned what it was built on." His uncle reached for the drive, but Chairman Whitmore closed his hand over it first. Julian pressed send. A soft tone sounded. Across the wall display, delivery confirmations multiplied while the room filled with the dry scent of overheated electronics. Counsel Reynolds broke the wax seal on the succession decree. Paper rasped beneath his fingertips. Under the Ashford Family Trust, public action materially damaging trust assets triggers immediate forfeiture. Julian Ashford is no longer beneficiary, designated heir, or controlling successor to Ashford Dynamics. Julian's access panel dimmed. His executive voting power dropped to 0. The penthouse deed, family shares, and succession rights vanished line by line, leaving his name on the screen with nothing beside it. His uncle released a short breath that sounded almost like laughter, until Chairman Whitmore opened the published archive. Bank transfers linked Marcus Dean to the $8.4 million diversion. Executive messages showed the takeover order. The prescription audit established sabotage under Julian's uncle's authorization. "The board recognizes the evidence," Whitmore said. "Your trustee authority is suspended pending regulatory action." The old man's smile disappeared. Adrian did not reach for Julian when the trustees departed. He gathered the remaining Helix projections and laid them side by side with the stripped-down Vale accounts. "I have no controlling stake left," he said. "You have no inheritance. Then neither of us gets to rule the other." Julian removed the Ashford signet ring from his finger. The gold felt cold and heavier than it should have. He placed it on top of the forfeiture decree, opened a blank incorporation file, and entered 2 names under equal founders. Julian Ashford, Adrian Vale, 50% each. Adrian studied the screen. No dynasty protections. No unilateral veto. No secret leverage. No ownership of medical decisions. No claim over the twins beyond what we choose together. A muscle moved in Adrian's jaw. Then he signed. Julian signed beneath him. By 2:17 a.m., the grand boardroom had become their first office. They worked shoulder to shoulder beneath half the lights, building a 6-person payroll, transferring Helix's independent licenses, and leasing a brick workspace in Brooklyn for $4,200 a month. Adrian calculated operating costs while Julian called the engineers willing to follow them without an Ashford or Vale empire behind the offer. Dawn diluted the darkness beyond the glass, turning the sleet silver. Julian leaned back when both babies shifted at once. Adrian rolled his chair closer, but waited until Julian took his hand and guided it to the movement beneath his shirt. On the screen, their new company existed with 12 weeks of funding, 1 unfinished project, and no inherited safety net. "We can build this," Adrian said quietly. Julian looked at their equal signatures, then at the man who had lost an empire beside him and refused to replace it with control over Julian. "We already started." His phone chimed with the final confirmation of forfeiture. Julian deleted the succession notice without opening it, slipped the ultrasound image into their first company ledger, and turned the key on the boardroom doors behind them. The throne was gone. Ahead waited 2 unfinished lives, a borrowed office, and a question Julian could no longer bury beneath rivalry. When the twins arrived, would he ask Adrian to build only a company with him, or something no contract could contain? A newborn's cry pierced the warm hush of the maternity suite, followed seconds later by another, softer but equally determined. Pale morning light streamed through the blinds, striping the white blankets in gold while monitors pulsed with quiet electronic beeps. Julian lay against the raised pillows, damp hair clinging to his forehead, and watched Adrian accept their first son from the nurse as though someone had placed the entire world in his unsteady hands. Their second son rested against Julian's chest, warm and impossibly small beneath the blue cotton blanket. Adrian approached slowly. His rolled sleeves were creased, and the sharp cedar scent Julian had once associated with boardrooms and rivalry had softened beneath sterile soap and newborn powder. "They're both healthy," Adrian whispered. Julian touched the hospital bracelet around Adrian's wrist. Beneath parent, the space for relationship remained blank because Julian had insisted they complete every document together. Months ago, leaving that line empty had felt like protecting his independence. Now the empty box looked colder than the steel rails surrounding the bed. "Sit down," Julian said. Adrian obeyed, careful not to disturb either baby. Julian reached into the bedside drawer and removed their first company ledger. Its black cover was worn at the corners, and the ultrasound image still rested between the opening pages. Adrian's brows tightened when Julian placed it across his knees. "You brought corporate records into the delivery room?" "I brought evidence of my worst habit." Julian opened the ledger. Beside their equal signatures lay a new document, and signed, with neither family crest printed across the top. Adrian read the first line, then looked up. "A marriage license application? Don't sound so victorious." "I wouldn't dare." Julian's fingers tightened around the blanket. Outside, cart wheels rattled over the tile, and somewhere down the hall a baby wailed before settling beneath a low, soothing voice. "I used to think every room had one winner," Julian said. "At Helix, I wanted that person to be me. When I learned about the twins, I thought you had defeated me in the only way I couldn't reverse." Adrian's smile disappeared. He did not interrupt. "But you never used them to control me. You gave up Vale Industries without asking for my shares, my gratitude, or a place in their lives. When I destroyed my inheritance, you stood beside me without taking the decision out of my hands." Julian glanced at the 2 infants between them. One tiny fist had closed around Adrian's finger, the other rested beneath Julian's collarbone. "You didn't end my arrogance by getting me pregnant. You ended it by showing me that loving someone doesn't mean surrendering to them." Adrian lowered his gaze to the application. "Julian, you've had almost no sleep. You don't owe me permanence because today was difficult. There. That." Julian pulled the document back before Adrian could touch it. You still think protecting my freedom means refusing to believe me when I choose you. With care, Julian shifted their son into the crook of his arm, pushed aside the blanket, and placed both bare feet on the cool floor. Adrian rose immediately but kept his hands at his sides. Julian stood under his own power. His knees shook once. Then he crossed the narrow space between them and opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple platinum band fashioned from the gold of his discarded Ashford signet ring, stripped of its crest and remade without a family emblem. Adrian stared at it while the morning sun caught along its clean edge. No throne, no merger, no Alpha claiming an Omega, and no Ashford heir choosing a strategic match. Julian held the ring between them. Just two founders, two exhausted fathers, and two former enemies who finally learned how to stand on equal ground. Adrian Vale, marry me. For the first time since Julian had known him, Adrian had no polished answer. His breath broke into a quiet laugh, and his eyes shone as he lowered himself, not to claim victory, but to meet Julian exactly where he stood. Yes, he said, on every condition. Adrian signed the application first and passed Julian the pen. Julian added his name beside Adrian's, then slid the ring onto his fiancée's finger himself. 3 months later, their Brooklyn office smelled of fresh paint, warm formula, and the coffee Adrian had forgotten on the windowsill. Project Helix ran across 2 monitors while their sons slept in matching bassinets between equal desks. On the brick wall hung no family portraits, only their incorporation certificate, marriage license, and the first ultrasound image that had once represented Julian's loss of control. Adrian leaned over to adjust a blanket. Julian caught his tie, drew him close, and kissed him beneath the soft hum of computers and 2 steady newborn breaths. His greatest rival had never conquered him. Adrian had simply become the first man Julian loved enough to meet without a crown.